then you put some liquid on the top, and you're like spinning your finger or whatever that thing is, and you know it makes different sounds and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of like these kind of massive like metallic balls, and then she starts putting it around your head, and then that apparently like heals you. So obviously, being the teenager I was at the time, I was like, hey, this shit don't work. But yeah, sound therapy is quite good. So humming is a good thing. So we are here on this week's PodStream to talk to Victor. Actually, we're going to be listening a lot actually, because Victor's going to be explaining WarHammer to someone that is not well acquainted with whatever WarHammer is. Because I have obviously an idea in my mind of what it is, but you're going to obviously try and walk us through your experiences with Warhammer. So this should be fun.
Sounds good. Just forewarning, I'm not an expert by any means. I haven't played the tabletop that much. I just have a lot of experience, mostly with the video
games. You can't put yourself down like that when we begin. You have to tell them.
What I'm saying is...
Motherfuckers, if you're listening to me, if my voice can reach your ears, I am an authority in this in my own way.
Oh, I'm absolutely an authority on the video games. Freaking love them. I'm just saying that there are probably some things I might get wrong about the actual game rules because they're confusing as hell.
Very, you know, it's good that you put it out there because obviously the internet can be full of trolls. I hope that the people that listen to us aren't that way, but if you are, you need to, you know, have a look in the mirror, fix yourself, and then come back. But you know what? At the end of the day, if you are an authority in terms of the video games for Warhammer, like talk us through what was the first time, what was one of your earliest experiences playing a Warhammer game?
So early on, one of the things you'll notice about, let's say, first disclaimer: Warhammer is specifically, let's say the medieval fantasy version. There are two versions: Warhammer and Warhammer 40k. Medieval fantasy takes place in like high fantasy, like Lord of the Rings kind of setting, where you know you got your humans, which are the split into the Empire, which is you know kind of like the Holy Roman Empire in that regard, but more military, more I guess westernized. They lots of flags, big great swords, you know, trumpets, exactly what you're talking about, drums. You know, that's like, the main human force. But then you got things like Kislev, which are similar to Russians and you know men of the North kind of way, but still civilized. There's lots of men.
Or is it like wildlings in Game of Thrones?
Yeah.
Like
there are those as well. There's a lot of like even further north in the wild wastelands of the frozen north. Then you'll have pretty much exactly the same wildlings, because it's leading on to another thing later on. They're a more corrupt, feral version, I guess. They're like wild beings. Yeah, wildlings. Let's call them that.
Okay, so from what you're saying so far, it seems like there's a fairly vast world to try and grasp.
Huge world. Yes.
Yeah, so I'm guessing that you kind of did that over time, exactly. Yeah. So what was like your first introduction? Do you remember your first memory? So how were you introduced to Warhammer, and was it a video game?
It wasn't a video game at first for me. I actually had a Games Workshop near me in Harrow, I think near there. You probably walked by it a few times.
I have, and I always wonder, like, what are these people doing?
So at its core, it's a tabletop game. It's basically a extensive board game where instead of like, you know, chess, you have pieces on both sides. Imagine if all those pieces, you could build them from scratch to an extent. You get them on like plastic sprues, you build them in custom poses, you paint them the way you like it, and then there's a rule set for how that game plays out. So instead of knight to e3 or something where each piece does its has very specific rules of where it can go, it's a little more flexible. You can, like the movement rules, it's like you can move this unit here. I think squads have to stick together, but as long as they're, you know, within an inch or two of each other, the squad moves as a group, and you can kind of be flexible where they end up. But the whole squad can move, say, 6 inches in a turn on the board, depending on if there's a tree or something in the way.
So I've always wondered about movement on the tabletop game, because I've been into that store and I've seen these amazing, little pieces of art that these guys are creating, depending on what. I mean, I don't even know what the vocabulary is to describe some of the pieces, but like the different pieces, I'm guessing, do different things, and they're on like a tabletop map, which is kind of varying in terms of like what I've seen. So there'll be one with like a castle, or there'll be one with like greenery, but I never understood how the pieces actually. How do you determine how they move? And because there's no squares, or there's no grid system that is visible to me, like how do
So
they move on a board?
s- generally, like that'll be set up beforehand. Each one will have stats, and each one will have a movement stat. A movement will be how far it can move in a particular turn. Say, I think the standard is like 6 inches for a regular unit. It might be halved if it's through difficult terrain, or doubled if they're flying, or if, for example, they board a tank or a horse, then they have far more movement speed. And you just whip out a ruler and say, okay, this unit can go 6 inches this way, and it's entirely flexible. And then in a 360-degree scope, you don't have to go backwards or forwards. It's not like checkers or something. So it's just entirely down
Okay.
to the player. Where do I want to end up before I start attacking?
What
And
if
then
you
there might
don't
be
have
other.
a ruler handy? Like what? Like, or do
Well,
you
then you
have?
can't play. It comes with a whole starter set in a
Okay.
way. It comes with
Oh, so
movement
you
rules.
have everything you need.
Yeah, the whole thing. Like, there's a starter set which will come with like a small army for both sides, paint kits, and all the movement things you need. Like, for example, in Warhammer 40k, which takes place in 40,000 years, the 40th
So
millennium,
let's hold on
38,000 in the future.
before we move into that. We need to
Just yeah.
first of all, I wanna like quickly get in a word from our sponsor, because we now have a sponsor. Our
Oh,
sponsor is
fantastic.
Common Sense. So guys, make sure you wash your hands, you do all that good stuff, keep the social distancing, and that's about it. That kind of represents, the times that we're living in. So when we look back at this in 1,000 years' time, and we're listening to this podcast, we know PodStream. I need to stop making that mistake. I need to get my vocabulary right. We'll know
Stream,
that
stream,
this is
stream.
what was going on, in this time. Okay, so back to the pod stream. So you explained earlier that Warhammer is set in a specific kind of medieval kind of setting,
Yeah.
swords and sandals. I'm guessing closer to than what.
Yes,
So
but with
Warhammer
magic.
40k is it more sci-fi? Is that right to assume,
Absolutely more
or am I
sci-fi.
wrong?
I mean, there's definitely a feral element to a lot of the things because there's a huge variety. It's set in the 40th millennium, 38,000 years in the future, across the entire galaxy. So it gives you kind of scope of like there's millions of worlds. So if you want a battle to take place on a particular world, you're like, oh, this one is actually like a cut-off form of humanity, and they've only ever got to like medieval society. So you could have like space marines with like massive armor, crash landing down, to repel invaders, and the actual local populace are just like peasants and medieval knights. Just because of that, you can have that disparity of technology just because that's the world they've set up. Anyway, getting ahead of myself.
So just the Space Marines, just to kind of that's like the most common thing or
I would
unit
say
is
that's where a
associated
lot
with
of people get
Warhammer
introduced. Yeah,
40k, right?
yeah, they're the face of Warhammer 40k. I'd say they're the pretty boys in a way. So
Yeah, they're
actually,
like the
I'll give,
poster boy for
that's it
what someone
exactly.
would see if they were kind of going past, or if they pick up a I don't know, a book or something. I would assume, because I know about space. I've seen the I've seen that character. Let's say more
Hmm.
often than some of the other ones.
Yeah, fair enough. He
Okay,
gets
so
around
what have we
more.
learned so far? We've learned that Warhammer is separate from Warhammer 40k. There's maybe similar elements, but the
Similar
world is very
rules.
different.
Yeah.
And when you first were introduced to it, it was through Games Workshop.
Yep.
Is that what it's called? Games Workshop
Yes,
in
exactly.
Harrow.
I think what actually happened because my memory's a bit fuzzy early on, but I think me and my dad found a random starter kit that I was talking about earlier in a charity shop, and it's like, oh, this looks cool, and
Oh,
I
nice.
think I remember the Games Workshop, and I was like, oh, cool. So I'll take this home. Got it for really cheap, like, thankfully, and then built them together. It's like, oh, this is cool. You're building the models, da, da, da. Like, it's a lot of fun. And then, okay, I suck at painting. I think that the furthest I got was undercoating them with spray paint, so they were all basically just solid black.
Are
But I
they
took
like
them in.
Oh, okay, they're black. I was gonna say, are they like silver or something?
Oh no, you can get like any kind of spray paint, but I think most undercoats are either solid white or solid black, unless you're an expert, you know exactly what you're doing.
Yeah.
But I took those. So one day I was like, okay, I'm ready. Because I was a very shy kid, you remember. So I took, I think, had a squad, just a single squad of troopers, about 10 Space Marines. It was again where I started. Took them in. I was like, okay, I'd like to try a game. And to be fair, I did come in at the end of the day. I think they were packing up. So they didn't have much time for me, as is fair. But instead of saying like, I think I wanted to start a game, so I was like, hey, can I just do a practice game with you guys just to kind of get into it? And So he's like, yeah, okay, sure. So I brought my squad out, and then so this is my first experience with one. I was like, oh cool, I'm gonna play a game. He's like, okay, I'm gonna bring. He brings out this massive freaking tank, which I didn't know the name until later. On the other side of the field, like I bring out this giant Bane blade, which has like 12 different cannons on it. I was like, okay, so you guys have to run across the field and attack me. It didn't show anything like it gave me the basic rules. Like here's the ruler charge. Like I didn't have any rockets or anything like that. It's like so had
Is
to
it
like
off the roll of a dice? Sorry to cut you off. Is it off the roll of a dice, the
there
movement,
are
or
movement is very straightforward. It's just you can move, like I said, 6 inches or 12 inches, whatever the
on
movement
your turn?
thing is, on your turn. So there'll
Okay.
be a movement phase, and then a shooting phase, and then other phases like morale, psychic, depending on all the advanced
Right.
rules.
So this guy who worked, they asked you to, advance on him.
Yes. So he said, you go first. I went first, move forward, and then he said, okay, now my turn. He didn't move because he had the range. He then just, okay, now I'm going to shoot all my 12 cannons at you. And I lost like half the squad very easily to a freaking cannon. And he's like, well, okay, now you can try advancing again. All you have left is the guys that can actually, they have power fists on, which are kind of meant for ripping apart, armor. And yeah, so I was basically dead in 2 turns with no chance to play. And he's like, okay, thanks for that. Hope you had fun. Bye bye. I was like, oh,
So just
okay.
out of okay, to take an aside, like just pure business practice, that doesn't seem like you're gonna get an ROI on any of your fucking investment. He was probably
No,
better off just saying, you know what, kid, come back tomorrow, and we
exactly.
can spend some more time. So how did that? So did that put you off?
Yeah, I was like a little humiliated, a little bit like quite put off.
Yeah,
It's
it's
like,
kind
oh
of
well, clearly they don't want me.
embarrassing
I
even.
didn't go back.
You didn't go back. Okay.
So no, it wasn't the best experience. I'm not saying like any like I'm sure like, a lot of people had better experiences. Just that particular one did put me off for a long time, and I thought, okay, well that's fine. I still like building the models. I'll just do it in the comfort of my own home, since I don't think anyone I knew played at the time. Um,
Yeah.
Still love it though. But
So
then
that was your first. So it wasn't exactly a pleasant experience. So what was it that kind of got
no,
you back into that franchise? Was it still the
the video
tabletop,
games.
or
A
yeah, so
huge
the
part
video
was the video
games?
games. I never really got to play a full tabletop game. Sadly, I still have my Space Marine army, the same one I got destroyed with, and I've collected a few other ones here and there. But mostly, I'd say 99% of my Warhammer experience has been the video game. Oh no, there's a lot of books as well, but good portion of it's been the video game. Started with Shadow of the Horned Rat, which was a Warhammer game, very difficult. Never actually managed to finish it. You kind of
Shadow of the
start.
Horned Rat. What a name!
Yes.
What a name! To
So
someone that's never played any of these games, is not
yeah,
very familiar with it. Shadow of the Horned Rat. Rats are creepy
okay.
enough as they are, and
Oh,
now they
where
have
till I get into
horns.
it?
So was this
Okay, so
a lot
I'll give you a
after
basic
the
rundown.
tabletop experience, or was it
It was a little later, yeah. Not too, like a year or two. It wasn't like I think I was still in primary school. Let me give you
so?
a basic rundown of the main factions in Warhammer and the Warhammer 40k, just as a nice basis, a foundation for going forward. So I've given the Empire. There's a few other human factions, but that's the main one. Then in typical fantasy fare, you have dwarves. If you've watched Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit or both, you kind of get an idea for the dwarves. They basically function the same way, except they have more catapults and mechs and tanks. Then you got elves again, same way. There's more. There's like wood elves, high elves, and moon elves, I believe, lunar elves.
Are they dark elves?
There are dark elves. There are definitely dark elves. Same vein, just a lot more cruel, and like they've like got sadism down to a finely toned art, essentially art form. So you got multiple, and they keep bringing out new like sub races as well, like just for people who want a bit more variation. Then there's you got orcs again, similar to how they look in Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is a good basis, honestly, for a lot of things.
Okay, I'm sure a lot of
Orcs
people
are
have
just
that basis. Yeah, I'm not one
orcs
of them.
just
No, but
fair enough.
I kind of know. Yes, I know from other things. I'm kind of
Mm.
aware of, like
Yeah, you
dark
got the
elves
basic
and
races.
Niflheim and yeah.
Yeah, orcs just there to have fun and wreck shop. And then you got the chaos, which are a corrupting influence. It's like a nebulous, like dark gods, essentially the ruinous powers.
What are
There's
they called?
four of they are. You have four of them. One is Khorne, the god of bloodlust and warrior zeal. Then you have
Corn, as
Siege,
in Corn.
Korn is in Khorne, similar to the band.
Oh, okay. I was gonna go with Korn, but yeah, I didn't think it was similar.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Sorry, Con.
Then you have Tzeentch. I think that's like Tzeentch. Is it
Right.
Tzeentch?
Okay.
Anyway, it's like Tzeentch, which is I think is purposely difficult to pronounce, but he's the god of similar to Loki, god of change, god of trickery, god of illusions, god of whatever the hell he wants, really.
Deception.
Deception, yeah, just yeah, essentially. Mainly change. I think change is a good sum up. He just likes change and chaos for chaos's sake, but not necessarily for in a cruel way, just a lack of order. I guess like the Joker. Anyway, then there's Slanesh, which is the god of debauchery and degeneracy in general. And then you have Nurgle, god of the plague god. These are all very like similar to. I think they're originally corruptions of like aspects of life. Like Khorne was originally supposed to be like a warrior god, and then that corrupted to bloodlust. And then Tzeentch was like god of just the cycle of rebirth. Eventually got into just trickery and like chaos for the sake of chaos. And Nurgle was like the god of life, and now it's like the perversion of life. So it's like diseases and growing. Anyway, it's like the
Yeah.
four basic horsemen of the apocalypse.
Okay,
Those four.
that's a good anchor point to compare it to. Yeah.
And these ruinous powers are similar, or if not very same, in both Warhammer and 40k. So a lot of people wondering if they're in the same universe, but it's a good framing device,
Could
I
it be
guess.
possible? Because I mean, the people. I mean, are they four physical entities, or is it like something in the game that people believe in?
I wouldn't call it physical, but they definitely exist. They're very
The
real in
the
game.
force is there of the whatever
Yeah,
the four things are, and they're present in both games. So I mean, who's to say
yeah,
they couldn't be the same thing?
yeah, exactly. There's no reason not to. I don't think there's ever
Unless there
been
is a
an
reason.
official
I'm
word.
nowhere. I'm just saying.
Yeah, like as far as I know, there's no real. I think the only thing is that in Warhammer 40k, it starts like the humans, like it's very real, like it's Earth, it's holy Earth in the future, whereas in Warhammer 4, just in Warhammer, I don't know if it's actually taking place on Earth or not. I'd have to check that. Anyway,
So Shadow of
so
the
the
Horned Rat is Warhammer, or is it Warhammer
Shadow,
40k?
it's Warhammer, and it's based on another race called the Skaven, which are giant rat creatures. Like imagine if they have like under cities. They always try and they live in like sewers under. Like they build like entire giant rat nests underneath cities, and they're just very like deceitful, underhanded creatures. Like and they're almost English, I guess. It's very tricksy creature. They don't prefer fighting out in the open unless they're guaranteed to win. But yeah, they're called the
That
Skaven
is very
rat
English.
people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Rat people, essentially. So that's the Skaven, and the Shadow of the Horned Rat is a game where the Skaven are. Not sure if it's about Vermintide. Anyway, it's about like Skaven are, coming up and causing issues, and I can't remember exactly what the Horned Rat. I think the Horned Rat is their god or what they believe in.
So who do you play as in this game?
In the Shadow of the Horned Rat, you play a mercenary captain for the Empire, just kind of trying to make his own way, and eventually gets brawled into a.
Hold on,
You
rewind.
go
Which
through the
empire? You didn't explain. I don't know what
sorry,
an
the Human
empire is.
Empire. They're called the Empire.
Okay, so the humans are the empire. Okay.
Yes. And you play a human mercenary captain with a small force, just kind of doing
What
local
kind of a
jobs.
game is it? What genre
It's
would it fall
a,
into?
I'd say it's just a strategy game essentially, but with a lot of
Okay.
like management each time because you're actually trying to manage your force. So every troop that gets lost, you have to eventually pay for to replace, and if you lose too many, there's only so much money in the game. So it's quite difficult, like managing it all, and just every time you lose something, you want to make sure that you have enough to replace it because it's you got to keep going for it. And it only gets harder as it goes on. So if you get to the end of the game and you have half your force gone, you're not going to win.
Yeah.
So
So the
it's a lot about
initial release date for this was in November 1995. So it's quite an old game.
yeah,
25
still
years.
holds. It's difficult to get run now, but I think you can get it on GOG if anyone's interested. But it's interesting fun. There's nothing quite like it.
Yeah. As soon as
Similar
GOG
with
start paying us, we'll promote this stuff. But until then, we want to know, like, okay, so how did you get your hands on this game, and like, how did you come across it
I,
all of a
I
sudden?
think I
Because
found it in Computer Exchange. Funnily enough, just down the road from Games Workshop.
okay,
Also an Arrow.
and this was on PC.
Yes.
Okay, and then what was it about this game that kind of stemmed all of the other interest, I would say, in everything Warhammer that would succeed this?
I think because I wanted to try Warhammer for tabletop, but never really got the chance. I didn't have the money. It's quite expensive hobby to get into,
I mean,
and
I can
so for,
imagine, yeah, because there's a lot of pieces you go by. There's like, the actual board, the map or the board that you play on is quite detailed, or it can be. I've seen some of these parts and then sprays, and I
a lot
like
of
the fact
storage
that
as well.
I can appreciate, like, now that you'd have to be quite. It forces you to kind of be creative. It forces you to use your imagination. It forces you to do
Yeah,
things which aren't as common now when it comes to forms of entertainment. So I can
yeah,
appreciate that a bit more now. But yeah, it's probably, unless you're invested, like, it'll probably be very expensive.
there, there is a
Uh,
huge, yeah, not even just the monetary investment. There's s- quite a steep learning curve to begin with as well. You can't just jump into a game. Essentially, the rule book is huge.
I can imagine a
Um,
very toxic fan base around stuff like that too.
it does happen. Like there was a lot of elitism, and before it became
Hmm.
quite mainstream, there's a lot of like, oh, this is our thing,
Well, it was
a lot
apparent
of
in the first
artists.
interaction you had with someone that was,
Yeah,
not more knowledgeable than yourself. But so obviously that kind of turned you away from it, and then you wanted to get into this because you couldn't get into that. And then how did you? So did you start reading the books at the same time? And obviously that's another thing we'll get to in a second, is just the amount of, just the volume of written literature there is about this thing.
oh, the
Like, it's
entire
kind of
Black Library is
staggering. Like,
huge. Yeah, I did read the Horus Heresy, which is another part of 40K. It's a very defining moment, but there's a whole series of books about it that I think is still going, like over 30 books at this point. Um, just by different authors writing different stories, but because I guess the main thing it's about. So there's Warhammer 40K, and then the Horus Heresy takes place 10,000 years before that. So they're like, okay, well, this is a new untapped resource. Let's talk about that time, which was very defining. So it's again constantly evolving. They're both evolving the 40K aspect. I think they've just gone into the 42nd or the 41st millennium. Oh, sorry, the 42nd millennium. Like it's just gone over into, so technically it's Warhammer 41K at this point. But as it ticked over, a whole bunch of things happened. So, like I said, you had chaos, and they're helping whenever. So a big point about the chaos is that even though they're all essentially at chaos, yeah, chaos undivided, the four ruinous powers rarely work together. They don't like how each other works. So it kind of gives a lot of variety to people who want to just play chaos, but they're like, oh, I want to be a corn army or I want a siege army because they have very different aesthetics and they have like unique rules,
you
which
mean as a
is interesting.
player of the game, or you mean the NPCs in the lore?
Both. So if you wanted to play a Khorne army, then you'd have to be like a Khorne. Khorne aesthetic is a lot more like spikes, and each one has different. That is another big aspect I forgot to mention is that when you're painting an army, you got to be more. So I want to be, say, if I want to make a Space Marine army, do you want to be the Ultramarines, who are, they're the poster boys. They're like the blue with white, and then I could be, the Blood Angels, who are like red and gold and like very. Or if you don't want to be the set ones, you can just make your own. They set it up so like there's always new chapters, you know, just popping up. So I want my own paint scheme. I just so they have their freedom and creativity to do what you want, really.
So if I was to create one, and then obviously there's a color scheme associated with, like, I don't know, you mentioned the Blood Angels. Are they different? Do they have different characteristics? Do they have any, or is it
They
just
can
like
do.
a
There are a lot of
customization
advanced
thing?
rules. Mainly just the customization thing. But there are a lot of advanced rules. Say if you wanted to play with the Ultramarines or the Blood Angels, then there are certain subsets of rules that you can add into it, but you'd have to agree with whoever you're. Like they also get unique units the more time goes on as well. Like I think one of the main, for example, they have unique leaders. Like there's Marnius Calgar, who's like the leader of Ultramar, who you could bring in, but only if you kind of have an Ultramarine army, unless you
Right.
kind of bend the rules a bit.
This is
Just a lot.
in the video game still.
This is still in the tabletop. There's a lot of
Oh,
bleed over,
tabletop.
sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, in the video games, you're kind of limited. Say, for example, Dawn of War. I think that's the most popular Warhammer 40k game ever, at least until now, or relatively recently. So you play a Space Marine army for the Blood Ravens, which is a new faction made purely for the games, but it's got a lot of popularity because I think there's 5 or 6 games out in the series now, and just follows them, stopping an orc invasion of a random planet somewhere that turns into is actually a chaos invasion. Chaos is used in their own tricksy, corrupt ways to use the orc invasion to their advantage, and so you get a good exposure to like here's how these space marines work, here's how chaos works, and yada yada yada. It's a good story. Then it moves on to the next one, introduces the Imperial Guard, which are the main human forces in Warhammer 40k. Space Marines being like the
Okay,
super
so
soldiers.
in 40K you're kind of moving around, I'm guessing, between
Yeah,
like planets and space and stuff. Whereas in Warhammer you're moving between what, countries, land, territory, or how does it,
yeah.
or are you still
Warhammer
moving between
Fantasy is more
planets?
local. It's mainly the one planet. I mean, there's it's generally the same map where you got all the empires on the same. If you play, for example, the more recent one of the Total War games, where they had Total War Rome, Total War Medieval, Total War Shogun. Now there's a Total War Warhammer, where you can actually have the Warhammer fantasy game brought to life in a way, and you can pick whichever faction you want. And there's actually Warhammer 2 now as well, with even more factions, and you get to see the full map in all its glory. If you, for example, if you start as the Human Empire, then their goal is to reunite the fractured empire and defend it against all threats. So you got chaos worshippers coming from the north and the wildlings, and you got orc war bands, going around just trying to, have fun and take over everything.
So
And
at
you got
what point do
elves.
you think you became a fan?
I would say Dawn of War was the one that really converted me, because before then I'd have a little exposure to, like, say, Warhammer, but then when I played Dawn of War, like, not only is that just a really good Warhammer 40k game, it's just a really good strategy game in general. I think for like at least a good few years it was in the top 10 of every PC list for strategy games,
So I've just
and
opened
for
up
good reason.
Steam because it's something that is not usually open because I don't really play PC games.
Hmm.
The Warhammer games I have on here are Warhammer 40k Dawn of War Game of the Year Edition. I've got
Oh, there you go,
Warhammer
that's it.
40k Dawn of War Dark Crusade, Warhammer
Hmm.
40k Dawn of War Soulstorm, and Warhammer 40k Dawn of War Winter Assault. So that's actually the only ones I don't know if they different games or are they different DLC.
So the Winter Assault is an expansion back before we had DLC. It's a full-on expansion, new campaign, where it introduces, instead of being as the Blood Ravens, you play the Imperial Guard trying to defend another world against a Chaos invasion. And this one is in particular trying to, I think, resurrect or restore a dead Titan. Now, those are something. Imagine basically a skyscraper used for battle. It's like a giant Titanic war machine, just stories high. It's
Yeah.
just huge and it's beautiful, and I don't think you can really get those on the field because, again, the scale is too big, but they're just really cool.
So you became a fan when you started playing the Dawn of War game, but why? What was it about that game? Or what
It was
was it
very
about that
visceral.
moment? Or what
Because
was
I
it
was
that got you excited to the point where you were like, fuck yeah, this is my shit. And I'm gonna
I was a big
convince
fan.
Mo to get it on Steam and never play it. Even though he's got four of the games, he's only gonna have played one, and it was in 2017, and he's played 9 hours of it. But that is how invested I'm in it. What was it like? What
So I was a
was it?
big PC. I've always been a big fan of PC gaming ever since I was
Yeah.
like 6 years old or something. And so I'm a big fan of strategy games as well, Age of Empire, Warcraft, Starcraft, the good ones, and a bunch of other niche ones. Oh, crap, Battle Realms, I think it was called. That was fun. Anyway, many others. And then Dark Crusade comes along, and it redefines the genre to a degree. Not only is it, like I said before, a really good Warhammer 40k game, but it's a new way of playing. Before then, you kind of had to spend
Dark
time
Crusade,
building up
yes, I have that one.
resources.
I have that,
Sorry,
yes.
just simple Dawn of War. That was the first one before any of the expansions come out. New way of playing.
So is
It's trying
Dawn
to
of War a
revitalize the
one
genre.
single game, and then obviously all of these other things are just expanding on Dawn of War?
Yes, essentially.
Okay.
So Dawn of War, when it came out, so before then, when you're starting a strategy game, it would be quite slow. Games could last like an hour or two. You'd have to go out, mine resources, wait, make a few troops, wait, mine more resources, expand a bit, wait, and then if you kind of, it takes a while. And then when Dawn of War comes out, the gameplay not only like encourages but rewards active play, like moving out, constantly going out. You can't really just sit there and turtle there. You you have to go out and make it. It's very active kind of gameplay, especially for a strategy game. So it pushed the player into constantly moving, constantly advancing, and raiding. I taken out. There were some strategic points. There was definitely still some base building elements to it, but it was a lot more of an adrenaline rush as well. Especially with the campaign, it's like not only can we revitalize the gameplay, but let's do it around a really cool story that introduces people well enough to the genre and
Yeah.
Warhammer 40k at large. And then it was like, okay, this is it. This is for a lot of people. I think this actually helped Warhammer at large become mainstream.
So what was the core appeal to get it to that next level, do you think?
It was very, especially for someone, I imagine, the tabletop can be quite slow. There's not much. It's a lot of about the imagination. It's like you're kind of seeing. It's plastic models, and again, it's you have to really enjoy it to go on. It's about your imagination. It's moving, but it's turn based. It's not very exciting, especially to watch if you're not that into it. And then Dawn of War comes along, and it's like you don't need the models, you don't need a huge infrastructure, you don't need disposable income. It's just here's everything we love about the Warhammer 40k universe, but with amazing sound effects, music, just punchy gameplay. It was just everything was just so visceral and alive, and it got people into the lore, the world. Like it is a really cool universe, the Warhammer 40k universe. So if you don't like the tabletop, but you still want to get involved in it, then you can play these games, and then they just kept bringing out more of them, and you can go online and just beat the crap out of other people with different races, and just like, oh cool, like it's just a cool exposure to the whole thing.
So what would you say is a more popular what brand is I guess more popular, the 40k or just Warhammer?
I would guess 40k is more popular. That's what I generally see talked about online, but that doesn't mean that Warhammer itself isn't popular. I just don't know the actual numbers. From my own experience, Warhammer 40k is generally the go-to. Also, Warhammer Fantasy has been rebranded recently. They did a whole I guess it's sort of reboot called Age of Sigmar, where it's not the same world. They'll use some of the same elements, but they've basically restarted. There's a big warp storm or something like that. Everything got sent through a black hole, and it just got revamped as Age of Sigmar. So I don't know much about that. I haven't paid much attention to that, but that's happening. I just want people to know that. And
How are they
a lot of
doing this
people,
through books? Are they doing it through comic books? Are they doing it through the game or
yeah, all of that. They have, as far as I know, they haven't done a game because they have Total War Warhammer, which is original Warhammer, and that's what people are still happy and content with. So I'm not entirely sure why they did this, other than to sell an entirely new array of models, which they're doing. That's the main reason they've relaunched it. Is that okay? New models, new interesting things are happening. I don't know why, but they're going on with it. Interesting. As part of it, they also announced that, oh, by the way, there's a weird random warp storm happening, and certain empires from a previous world are coming through, and it's like that. So you're allowed to bring models from old Warhammer Fantasy into the new one. And it's like, if you're going to do that, then why did you do this to begin with? Anyway, again, I'm not too
who is
up to
making
date.
all of these
Games Workshop.
so having a look here, like Shadow of the Horned Rat was developed by Mindscape, and they were a French company. I don't think they operate anymore. So who owns the
I wouldn't say so.
actual Warhammer franchise?
Games Workshop.
Okay, all right. So that's all they do. They have any others, or is it just Warhammer?
It's Warhammer and Warhammer 40k as far as I know. They own the Black Library as well, which is all the books in the Warhammer 40k universe. I don't know of any other IPs that they own, but I mean, those would definitely be the biggest ones.
Okay.
They are actually no. What I have seen when Lord of the Rings came out, the movie, they were licensed to make Lord of the Rings model miniatures exactly the same way as Warhammer 40k and Warhammer
Oh, right. Okay.
Fantasy. So you'll often see. I remember when it first came out, you'd see like massive arrays of like the Fellowship, fighting lots of goblins in miniature form, and there's a whole game based around that. I don't know if Games Workshop owns the license to that still. or how active that is. But there's a lot of new stuff coming out. Like for example, the Fallout series of games. There are Fallout miniatures now, and then there's Skyrim miniatures. So there's a lot of licensing going on. Again, I'm not sure if they own those or if
I,
there's
I
like a
reckon
smaller
it's probably
company
like
doing
a
it, but
limited time deal
yeah,
to produce like a certain line or um, certain period of time if they're doing like a collaboration or something. Because I'm checking here now and I see like Games Workshop is headquartered in Nottingham,
mhm.
um, founded in 1975. So is that when is I don't know what they were doing before this.
Who knows?
I'm just looking at the quick Wikipedia. Best known products are Warhammer Age of Sigmar and Warhammer 40k. The fact that they mention Warhammer Age of Sigmar first is kind of
Yeah,
showing that they're like hard
that's
pulling into
the
that direction.
yeah,
Um,
that's their new baby. Anyway,
okay.
let's go back to a. So there was the base. I think there's also new expanded races in Warhammer 40k. You got vampires, like imagine Dracula with an army, like very similar to that. They operate on corruption as well in their own kind of way. Can only
Yeah.
operate at night,
Yeah.
I
Listen,
think.
listen, listen. No one cares about that. We can Google that information. What I want to know is that you told me recently that you've been getting back into it. So how did that happen?
So you know how the passions ebb and flow, but then when Total Warhammer
Yeah.
came out, that was a lot of fun. It was like, okay, now I can actually play.
Oh
Because
wait.
before
Is that
then,
a separate? Is that a new game called Total Warhammer?
sorry, no, that is just that's two IPs. So there's a Total War franchise. They made Total War Rome beforehand. Then they made
You
Total
have to
War.
remember, you're talking to someone that doesn't know anything, so you
No,
have to
sorry. Yeah.
explain these
So
things.
it's there's
So what
Total
is
War
yeah.
Warhammer. It just sounds stupid to say Total War or Warhammer, but it's the two IPs. I understand they can't blend them together, but anyway, that's a new game that came out relatively recently. It lets you play. It's not the tabletop. It's a strategy game with the Warhammer models, I guess. So you can still play. You play the Empire, as mentioned before. You can play all the races, and they all have unique goals and traits and units and ways of operating, and it just expands. It's very much a Total War game with Warhammer assets. So
What is
it's
a
like a
Total
epic
War
scale.
game?
It's like an epic scale, both the strategy game on both the like the galactic map. Sorry, not the galactic map. The like the campaign map would be the world at large. So you'd have to take over territories, manage your finances, manage political stuff, and then if combat does occur, then it goes to a actual battle, like strategic battle screen where you command your troops directly. So it's like two
Okay, so
game modes in one
you're kind
essentially.
of you're creating the world or the economy or infrastructure, and then obviously if it gets to conflict, then it's a different kind of a game. I'm guessing.
Yeah, exactly. Two very different game modes, but they complement each other nicely, and that's always kind of been the Total War experience. And they brought that to Warhammer, which has revitalized Warhammer fantasy in a similar vein that Dawn of War did. And then they
Okay.
introduced more recently, I think it was last year or the year before, Total War Warhammer 2, which basically a huge expansion. If you owned the first one, you could still play all the races from the first one and previous campaigns, but it added a whole new array of things as well, like a bunch of new sub races, new commanders for each race, and they're still updating it right now. No Age of Sigmar though. Interestingly enough, there's not. I guess it's not Total War Age of Sigmar. Maybe they'll do that in the future, but right now everyone seems to be still
So
happily
did you just
enjoying
happen
Warhammer.
to come across it, or did you see it? It was on sale, and you thought, okay, let me just get back into it, or
I've always liked the Total War games. Total War Shogun was a huge favorite. That was where you get to play Japanese in Japan, trying to become the Shogun. That was a lot of fun. But that was a while ago. They had Total War Shogun 2 relatively recently, and then when I saw Total War Warhammer come out, it's like, oh, well, that's a blending of two interests right there. Let's see how this goes. I heard it was very good. A couple of friends got it as well. It's like, let's give it a go. And
oh, so you can play?
amazing.
Is it like co-op or online
You can play
multiplayer?
it's online multiplayer. You can play co-op or you can play against each other. Like everyone's kind of free to do whatever they want. It plays in a turn-based mode, so if you're playing a single player, then you do your thing, and then the next empire will do their thing. If it's just AI, it just skips over everything that they do. And if it's in online multiplayer, you take your turn, and then the other player takes their turn. And then it's just simple turn-based combat. But if you're allied, then you can join battles together. You can work on the campaign together and like share things with each other. And then if you're allied in the game and a battle occurs and your armies are near each other, then they can reinforce each other and you both get to control your units separately. It's quite handy.
Okay, so that was what kind of got you back. So are you still playing at the moment?
I am actually. I took a big hiatus from it because I needed to upgrade my PC. But then in the meantime, they're still updating the game. Played the second one, which is basically an expansion of the first one. Restarted the Empire campaign I was running, and it's just far more functionality in the second one. So it would be hard to go back at this point. And I think I'm let's let's see, a good few hours, 111 hours into Total War Warhammer 2, and I'm sure other people have far more than that. But
When did this?
yeah, I mean,
When was this originally released? Was it 2017?
this Total War Warhammer 1, I think, was, and Total War Warhammer 2 was in the last couple years, I believe, unless I'm
Yeah,
mistaken.
I've got September 2017 for Total War Warhammer 2.
Okay, my mistake.
Well,
Ah,
it's still 40 quid on Steam at the moment.
I was very lucky someone got it for my birthday, so I couldn't even argue.
Oh, nice. It was just there. Nice.
Yeah.
So
And again, there's lots of DLC for it as well. If you want to say play a new hero for the Wood Elves, then you'll buy that, and then it's like, oh cool. Then they have different aspects because they're like new passives, new abilities, new ways of playing. For example, if you play as the Empire, your whole goal is to try and unite everyone through political. Like, I remember in Total Warhammer 1, there wasn't many diplomacy options. You kind of just had to hold everyone together through force of arms, essentially, or trading. Now they have a whole political maneuver unique to the Empire. Like everyone, you kind of had to juggle everyone's fealty. Like if the two of your lords are going to go toward each other, you either have to, if you don't have enough kind of built up good faith with the other two, or imperial authority, it's called, then you'll just have to let them go to war or decide which one to favor. But if you have enough, you can, step in, tell them, like, knock it off, and you're just trying to like put out a lot of fires the whole time until they trust you enough to join your army at large, and eventually you want to unite the whole empire as one functioning unit, and that's one of the main victory conditions to win as the empire. But then if you play as, for example, there's a Joan of Arc character of Britonia, which are like the French knights, and her entire thing is going on a crusade in what looks like South Africa, or sorry, just Africa, and she's trying to find a legendary sword. So it's an entirely different campaign in a very different area, but they're both within the same game. You see what I mean? So there's a huge amount of
it
content.
sounds like, yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of different things that could appeal to different people in terms of whatever the gameplay loop is. Maybe I think that's what you find
Yeah, exactly. So,
enjoyable about like playing this game again is obviously the loop of gameplay.
hmm. So there's always you might try someone out and it's like, oh, I'm not like I like the game. I don't like how these guys play. I'll try the dwarves. I'll try the orcs. I'll try the vampire. I'll try the undead. There's like what is essentially Egypt, and you can get mummified priests and kings, and they have an entire undead army. So that's an entirely different way of playing. It's interesting. They have
Nice. Okay.
Skaven as
So
well.
you're gonna continue playing Total Warhammer 2.
Yes,
What's the expected time to complete, or is there, or is it one of those things where you just go back into a loop and try something different?
so yeah, it's a bit of both because imagine if you want to play one campaign, depending on the size of the victory condition and what you want to get out of it. Like you could try and rush for that at the expense of everything, or you can just have fun, expand, and take new hits as they go. Like there's a lot of events that happen. Like for example, the orcs, if they rally too much, then they kind of gain on their own momentum. One orc tribe will rise up, absorb all the other ones into it, and then go on a massive crusade called a war in the orc tongue, which is just war,
Nice,
and they'll go
nice.
on and just like a big, essentially a jihad, and just kind of crush everyone until they get bored or killed, whichever one
Okay.
comes first.
So I'm gonna quickly go through like, okay, what I've kind of picked up on, or what I've kind of learned, and I haven't been making notes. I'm just kind of going off of kind of what you've been saying. So obviously, to start things off, like Warhammer is different from Warhammer 40k. Warhammer is
Yeah.
more medieval, like swords and sandals style, Lord of the Rings style, elves and stuff, and 40k is more sci-fi in terms of space and space wars and futuristic and all the rest of it. And then there's these four entities that are kind of like evil gods, or they were gods and they kind of lost their way. And that kind of sets the foundation for a lot of the individual groups and troops within the worlds and how they base their beliefs and kind of what they do. And then there's the tabletop RPG. Sorry, yeah, is it called tabletop RPG? Yeah, where you kind of
I call it
didn't get
tabletop
into
art,
it
yes.
because there was some guy in Games Workshop who, instead of just saying, "Hey kid, come back tomorrow and we'll play a proper game," was just like, "Okay, well let's play this and let me just destroy you ever wanting to touch this game again." So the
Yeah.
update, I have a bit of breaking news here. Actually, I'm just checking on the Google, and the good thing is, like, you're still here. I don't think that Games Workshop is. So you know what, you won in the long term. Anyway,
I
moving
did
on.
it.
Yeah, so we had the first game you played was Shadow of the Horned Rat, um, and that was kind of what got you in, and then it just kind of snowballed, I'm guessing, from there, and then you got into all of these other things, maybe read some of the books,
A lot of the books.
and
Yep.
it's like been an ongoing thing where you kind of, it's like a life. Like for me, it'd be pro wrestling. Your interest will dip and wane, and you have
Yeah,
peaks and
exactly.
valleys of interest, and now you're at a point where you want to play the thing again, and you're playing a Total Warhammer 2. Is that what it's called?
Exactly, yep.
Right. Okay. And yeah, you're quite kind of enjoying the gameplay loops in that. Is there, as we kind of wrap things up, like, is there anything else you wanna? Is there any particular memory you wanna kind of talk about? Is there anything that I don't know? Is there anything you feel like you wanna say to kind of conclude um, this pod stream?
I will say I've always sucked at painting, so there's a lot of there's a lot of, like I said before, there's a lot of build up to try and actually making the tabletop work. But for people who don't like any kind of aspect of it, because there's building, there's painting, and then there's actually learning all the rules. There's a huge investment financially and physically to kind of get this working. But for people don't who want to get into the game but either can't or won't, especially during this time of self-isolation and quarantine, you can use the tabletop simulator game. There's a game called Tabletop Simulator which simulates the tabletop RPGs, and not just this. You can simulate chess if you wanted to.
Can
You can
you
make up
can
your
you
own if you
play
wanted to.
can you play that with other people? That's my first question.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's
Yes.
perfect. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah, you just start a room. You host the room. You have all the assets. You put them on the table. Say if you want a Space Marine army, and again, the assets aren't owned by Tabletop Simulator. You'll have to find your own or make your own. So again, I'm not endorsing any kind of illegal activity. I'm just ever just these kind of things are available for those who want to try it out, especially if they already have bought all the assets but can't play online for obvious reasons. Tabletop Simulator is a very good alternative without having to invest a huge amount. And again, you can play online with people. You can just try it out before you fully invest if you wanted to.
It's like the
How's
Temtem
that?
to Pokemon. Got it. Got it.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I want to
Exactly.
say thanks for sharing or explaining, Warhammer to me. I kind of think I understand a little bit more about it now. A little bit more
It's
about it.
very. There's
Um,
again, I haven't even touched the surface of it. I've barely hit the tip of the iceberg. There's again, like you said, there's a huge amount of lore for both Warhammer and Warhammer 40k. Races I haven't mentioned, worlds and aspects, but yeah, that's the general gist.
yeah.
Warhammer
Yeah.
40k, it's the whole thing is just the galaxy is at war constantly, just so they can keep the fighting going on. And Warhammer Fantasy isn't much different, but there's a bit more political intrigue going on.
Okay,
Anyway,
well, if we do this again at some point, like, I want you to write down maybe some of your best memories or something. We'll kind of go through that. But yeah, thanks
sounds
for
good.
explaining this. If you've been listening to us, I appreciate it. If you want to help us, you can go over to YouTube and hit the subscribe button. If you want to follow us on Twitch, it's twitch.tv/MAU2x15. And the other thing is, if you want to keep up to date with the latest, just follow me on Twitter at Mo2x15. That's MAU2x15. Or Victor's also using Twitter at the moment. He's LT Buttstrong. That's LTBUTTSTRONG. And we will see you guys next time.
If you have any questions, please comment below. I'm happy to answer anything about Warhammer or in general. See you guys.